In 1976, in England's beautiful Lake District, a 30-year-old mother named Carol Park vanished from her home. For 21 years, her case went cold, gathering dust in a forgotten file. Her husband, Gordon, a schoolteacher, told police she had simply run off with another man, and life, for the most part, moved on. The postcard-perfect scenery of Cumbria held its peace, and the mystery of Carol Park just faded into local folklore. But then, everything changed. Amateur divers exploring the murky depths of Coniston water stumbled upon a package. Inside, they found Carol's body almost perfectly preserved by the cold, deep water. She was still in her nightdress, her body trussed up with complex knots and weighed down. The lady in the lake had been found. The discovery ignited a new investigation that would lead to one of Britain's most debated and controversial murder convictions. The case police built against her husband was a tangled web of circumstantial evidence, forensic clues, and confessions from jailhouse informants. He was convicted in 2005, only to take his own life in prison, insisting on his innocence to the very end. But the truth is, the case against him was troubled from the very beginning. So, what went wrong? Here are the 5 critical mistakes that tainted the Lady in the Lake investigation and left a shadow of doubt that still lingers. The flawed initial response and loss of critical evidence. To understand the first major failing, we have to go back to where it all began. July 17th, 1976. On that day, Gordon Park said he took his 3 young children on a day trip to Blackpool. He claimed his wife Carol wasn't feeling well and stayed home at their bungalow, named Bluestones. When he returned that evening, he said she was gone. Gordon Park didn't report his wife missing right away. Accounts differ, but some claim it was 6 weeks before he officially told authorities, and even then, he reportedly went through his solicitor. His explanation? Carol had a history of leaving. He claimed she'd left him twice before, and he just expected her to come back. This time, he told them, she must have left for good. And right here, we hit the first critical mistake. The initial police response in 1976 was a disaster. Based almost completely on Gordon's story, police treated Carol's disappearance as a domestic issue, not a potential crime. They accepted the narrative that a devoted mother of 3 would just walk away from her children and her job as a teacher without a word. The attitude at the time often viewed these cases as marital problems rather than foul play, and the investigation lacked any real urgency. But the most damaging error wasn't just the dismissive attitude, it was a concrete, irreversible blunder. The original police file from the 1976 missing person inquiry was lost. And we're not talking about a few loose papers. This was the entire record of the initial inquiry. It held the original statements Gordon Park gave to detectives and the accounts of neighbours and friends, all recorded when memories were fresh. When Carol's body was found 21 years later and a murder investigation was finally launched, detectives were flying blind. They had no official record of Gordon Park's story from 1976. They couldn't compare his new statements to his old ones to look for holes in his story. Had his story changed? Were there details he suddenly remembered or conveniently forgot? These are basic questions in any cold case, and the answers were gone forever. This loss of evidence hobbled both the prosecution and the defence at the 2005 trial. Gordon Park's lawyers couldn't use his original account to show he'd been consistent for 2 decades. The prosecution couldn't use it to catch him in a lie. The court was left with memories that were 21 years old. The 2020 Court of Appeal judgment, while ultimately upholding the conviction, specifically noted that the police were criticised for losing their file. This wasn't a small slip-up, it was a foundational failure that meant the quest for justice was compromised from the moment Carol's body was pulled from the water. For 21 years, Coniston Water held its secret. The case of Carol Park went cold. Gordon Park continued raising their 3 children in the family home, sticking to his story. Carol had left, and he didn't know where she'd gone. To the outside world, he was a single father, abandoned by his wife, and for 2 decades her children grew up not knowing if their mother had abandoned them, or if something much darker had happened. Then, on August 13th, 1997, That all changed. A group of amateur divers were exploring the depths of Coniston water. They weren't looking for anything specific, but in the dark, cold water about 80 feet down, they found something. It was a large, heavy package resting on an underwater ledge. If it had been dropped just a few meters further out, it would have plunged into a much deeper part of the lake, likely to have been lost forever. The package was wrapped in plastic and bound with ropes. The divers reported their find, and when police brought the bundle to the surface, they made a gruesome discovery. Inside was a body dressed in a blue nightdress and weighed down with rocks and lead pipes. Because of the cold, low-oxygen water, the body was strangely well preserved. Dental records soon confirmed the unthinkable. The body was Carol Park, the 30-year-old teacher who had vanished 2 decades earlier. The lady in the lake had been found. This discovery immediately turned a cold case into a murder inquiry, and the focus fell squarely on one man, Gordon Park. When police told him his wife's body had been found, his reaction was reportedly muted. He simply said, "Oh dear." He was arrested and charged with her murder. The initial charges were dropped in 1998 due to a lack of evidence, but police were convinced they had their man. This intense focus, however, would lead straight to the investigation's next major mistake. Mistake number 2, ignoring alternative scenarios and suspects. With the discovery of Carol's body, the police zeroed in on Gordon Park with an intensity that became tunnel vision. This relentless focus on one suspect is a classic investigative trap, and in this case, it was the second major mistake. The police and prosecution seemed to systematically downplay or ignore other possibilities that didn't fit their story. From the start, there were other leads. Back in 1976, a neighbour reported seeing a man in a VW Beetle with Carol on the morning she supposedly disappeared. This sighting was never fully investigated. Who was he? A friend? A stranger? We'll likely never know. Even more compelling was the testimony from an acquaintance named Dorothy Baines. She insisted she saw and spoke with Carol Park at a motorway service station about 80 miles south of the Parks' home on the very weekend Carol disappeared. If that was true, it would have completely shattered the prosecution's timeline, which claimed Gordon had already killed Carol at home. So how did the prosecution handle this inconvenient witness? They dismissed her account as confused and plainly wrong. Instead of investigating the possibility that Carol had indeed travelled south, they wrote it off. It's a textbook example of confirmation bias, where you favour evidence that supports your theory and discard anything that doesn't. This failure to explore other avenues created a narrative that was neat and tidy, but not necessarily true. By focusing only on Gordon, the investigation became less about finding out what happened to Carol Park and more about proving Gordon Park was the killer. Every piece of evidence was seen through the lens of his guilt. His knowledge of boats and knots wasn't a hobby, it was a murderer's toolkit. His quiet, maybe awkward personality wasn't just him. It was the cold detachment of a killer. This tunnel vision meant that plausible alternative theories were never given the weight they might have deserved in court. The defense was left fighting a single, monolithic theory, while other credible possibilities were pushed to the side. Every one of these errors didn't just affect the trial. They shaped how Britain understands justice itself. This case is a labyrinth of conflicting evidence and questionable conclusions. If you're finding this analysis compelling, make sure you like the video and subscribe to Murmurs of Crime, because we examine complex cases like this every week. Mistake number 3, reliance on flawed forensic evidence. When you don't have an eyewitness, forensic evidence is supposed to be your bedrock. In Gordon Park's trial, the prosecution presented a few key pieces of forensic evidence to connect him to the murder. But a closer look shows this evidence was far from solid, and relying on it was the third major mistake. First, there was a rock. The body was weighed down with rocks, and the prosecution claimed that one of them was a perfect geological match for rocks at the Park family home Bluestones. They presented this as a powerful link, suggesting Gordon had used a rock from his own property. However, expert evidence brought up during the appeals process seriously questioned this claim. Geologists argued that the type of rock was actually common in the area, and the match wasn't nearly as unique as the prosecution had made it sound. That supposedly rock-solid link was suddenly looking a lot more fragile. The second piece of forensic evidence was the potential murder weapon. A pathologist concluded Carol died from blunt force trauma to the face. The prosecution pointed to an old ice axe found in Gordon Park's home, suggesting it was the weapon. But during the appeal, it was revealed that the prosecution hadn't fully shared the pathologist's opinion on the axe. While it was a possible weapon, the expert didn't believe it was the actual weapon used, a critical distinction the jury didn't get to fully consider. But maybe the most significant forensic issue is about DNA. The ropes used to bind Carol's body were preserved for over 2 decades. In the years since the murder, DNA technology had advanced dramatically. When those ropes were finally tested, they produced a shocking result. DNA from an unidentified male was found in the knots. Crucially, that DNA did not belong to Gordon Park. You'd think the presence of another man's DNA on the murder ropes would be a bombshell. It opened up the very real possibility of another person being involved. Yet, the significance of this evidence was hotly debated, and the prosecution pressed on with its case against Gordon, leaving the mystery of the unknown DNA profile unresolved. This reliance on shaky and incomplete forensic evidence created an illusion of scientific certainty that just wasn't there. Mistake number 4, failure to disclose damaging information about key witnesses. With a circumstantial case, the prosecution needed something more. They needed a confession, and they got 2 of them. The testimony of 2 prisoners who claimed Gordon Park confessed to them became a cornerstone of the prosecution's case. But the failure to disclose just how unreliable these witnesses were was the 4th critical mistake, and it was a big one. While Gordon Park was in jail in 1998, 2 former inmates came forward with explosive claims. They alleged that Gordon had confessed to murdering his wife. One claimed Park talked about it in his sleep and muttered, "She deserved it." He then said Park confessed directly to him that he had killed Carol with an axe. Another inmate gave a similar story. For the jury, this was incredibly powerful. It was the smoking gun the circumstantial case needed, providing a motive, a method, and a direct admission of guilt. The problem? These witnesses were deeply unreliable, and the prosecution failed to fully disclose their credibility issues to the defense and the jury. This was later highlighted by the Criminal Cases Review Commission, the independent body that investigates potential miscarriages of justice. Their investigation revealed that one of the main prisoner witnesses was a heroin addict trying to detox at the time of the supposed confession. Opiate withdrawal can cause confusion, memory distortion, and a desperate need to say anything to improve one's own situation. The evidence from the other prisoner was later described as patently fabricated. It's a sad reality that jailhouse informants often have powerful incentives to lie, like reduced sentences or better prison conditions. Without knowing the full background of these witnesses, the jury couldn't properly judge their testimony. This is where a fundamental rule of a fair trial comes in: disclosure. The prosecution has to share any material that could weaken their own case or help the defense. By not revealing the full, damaging context about their star witnesses, they presented a skewed picture to the jury, allowing questionable testimony to be treated as fact. Mistake number 5, ignoring logistical and practical problems. The final key mistake was overlooking the huge logistical problems with the prosecution's own theory of the crime. The story they told the jury was a straightforward tale of domestic murder, but when you look closer, it starts to unravel under the weight of some simple, real-world questions. Here was the prosecution's theory. Sometime in July 1976, Gordon Park, in a fit of rage, killed Carol in their bedroom. He then wrapped her body, bound it with ropes, and somehow stored it, maybe in a chest freezer, they speculated, before driving it to Coniston water, rowing out, and dumping it. But this theory ignores some glaring hurdles. First, the murder itself. The children's bedroom was right next to their parents' room in the bungalow. The pathologist said Carol died from multiple heavy blows to her face. Is it really plausible that such a violent and brutal attack could have happened in total silence? Carol almost certainly would have screamed. The children, sleeping just a few feet away through a thin wall, likely would have woken up, but they heard nothing. Second, the body. According to the prosecution, Gordon then had to manage the incredibly difficult task of moving, wrapping, and binding her body with those complex knots. Then he had to hide it. The chest freezer idea was just that, an idea with no evidence one was ever owned or used. Finally, and most problematically, he would have had to transport the body from their home to Coniston Water. He would have needed to get the body into his car unseen, drive to the lake, move the body to a boat, row out and dump it, all without a single person noticing. This would be a massive undertaking for anyone, let alone a man who was also caring for 3 young children. The prosecution never offered a clear, believable timeline for how he pulled off this extraordinary feat completely undetected. The prosecution's case was essentially a conclusion in search of a method. They were sure that Gordon did it, but they were never able to explain how. They dismissed these practical problems as minor details, but in a circumstantial case, the details are everything. In January 2005, after a 10-week trial, the jury found Gordon Park guilty of murdering his wife, Carol. He was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 15 years. From his prison cell, Gordon Park never stopped proclaiming his innocence. Supported by his children, he and his family launched a campaign to clear his name. An initial appeal was dismissed in 2008. Then, on January 25, 2010, his 66th birthday, Gordon Park was found dead in his cell. He had taken his own life. For some, his suicide was an admission of guilt. For his family, it was the tragic final act of a man broken by what they saw as a miscarriage of justice. But the fight didn't end there. The case was eventually taken up by the Criminal Cases Review Commission. In 2018, the CCRC referred the case back to the Court of Appeal, stating there was a real possibility the conviction would be quashed in light of all the issues we've discussed. In May 2020, 3 senior judges delivered their final ruling. Despite acknowledging the weaknesses in some of the evidence, they dismissed the appeal. In the end, they decided the conviction was safe, calling the circumstantial case against him very strong. For Gordon Park's family, it was a devastating blow and the end of their legal fight to clear his name. The case of the lady in the lake is a tragedy with victims on all sides. A young mother, Carol Park, lost her life violently. Her children grew up without her, only to see their father convicted of her murder decades later. And that father, Gordon Park, died in a prison cell, branded a killer, while insisting he was an innocent man. The 5 critical mistakes in this case cast a long shadow. The loss of the original police file created a black hole at the start of the story. Investigator tunnel vision meant plausible alternatives were cast aside. Flawed forensic evidence built a scientific case on shaky ground. Unreliable jailhouse informants, whose credibility issues weren't fully revealed, tainted the core of the prosecution's argument. And the failure to address glaring logistical problems left huge questions unanswered. While the courts have spoken and the conviction stands, these errors have created a deep and unsettling ambiguity. They help turn a complex mystery into a simple story of guilt, but the truth may have been far more complicated. The story of the lady in the lake is a cautionary tale about the dangers of confirmation bias, the fallibility of evidence, and the immense pressure to close a case. The legal system reached its conclusion, but for many, the question of what really happened to Carol Park remains a haunting mystery, lost in the cold, dark waters of the lake. And that's the chilling heart of the lady in the lake. The evidence didn't disappear. It simply waited. Thank you for joining me on Murmurs of Crime. If this story chilled you, if it made you think twice about what lurks just beneath the surface of our collective consciousness, then please hit like, subscribe, and share, as it will help this new channel grow. So, what do you think was the biggest mistake in this investigation? Do you believe justice was served, or do you think there's more to the story? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read and reply to them all. The discussions we have here are a vital part of keeping these important cases in the public eye. I'll see you again very soon. Until next time, stay safe, stay kind, and never stop listening for the Murmurs of Crime. Bye for now.